Okay, so Templar Tanks. You might know this, but Templar Tanks are not super useful. And there are a few reasons for that. So the main reason being, there's no real good group buffs and utilities that you can get from having a Templar Tank in your group. So if you're doing 4-man content and you want to play a Templar Tank, then by all means, just play one. The main issues you're going to have playing 4-man with a Templar Tank is the lack of skills like a CC, a chain, things like that. You have some serious issues on a Templar Tank in 4-man content because it's not built very well for dealing with 4-man content. When you take it into a trial situation, they're not very well built for trial situations because they don't have much group utility or group benefits. And one other Templar in a group will replace the need for a Templar Tank if we're looking at a trial environment. But in terms of 4-man content, if you want to use one, if you find a Templar fun, then by all means, go ahead and play one. There is nothing stopping you from playing one. People sometimes get confused when I'm kind of doing a little rundown on like a specific class, that I'm not criticizing the fact that people might use them. They're just not the best at tanking. They're really not. There's so many other classes that perform the tanking role far better than a Templar. So let's just go down and have a look through the skills. The tank skills that you're going to use as a Templar. So if we take a little look, so radial sweeps, not going to use it. Puncturing sweeps, if you are playing as a kind of hybridized, you might play as like an off tank sometimes. As a Templar, you might use one of the morphs of sweep to kind of add a little bit of damage into your repertoire. So if you are doing VHOF, for example, I have done TikTok Tormentor on this character, on the Templar. In that environment, I was using jabs. So on the third boss, I was a damage dealer, hybridized kind of tank build. And I was just using jabs, and that worked for that situation. So that was really good. But otherwise, it's not a tank skill. It's a damage-based skill, but if you want to be able to do overland content and things like that, it's a good skill for then, because it will provide you some damage, and that's good for that environment. Piercing Javelin, you're not going to use it. It's really not good. It knocks enemies back. It's literally the worst thing you can do for a tank, is knock enemies back. If you're using knockback skills as a tank, it is not good. Focus Charge. So if you combine Focus Charge alongside the Tormentor set, this will allow you to do an area of effect taunt. You've got to combine the Tormentor set with Focus Charge to be able to achieve that. Now, this is not something that I would advise everybody does. You can try it out. If you're a new tank, maybe you chose a Templar and now you're realizing, oh no, like this is difficult. And that's because they're not very well built for doing the content you're trying to do. What you can do is use Tormentor with Focus Charge to create an AoE taunt feature. The problem with that is, you're obviously using 5 pieces of gear and a skill to do the same thing that you can just use Pierce Armor and Inner Rage to do. So one skill would replace the need for Tormentor. So I could understand why newer players would do that to achieve that AoE taunt, because it can be helpful, but it's very unnecessary. When you reach a certain point in your kind of progression as a tank, all of a sudden this won't be necessary. So it's very niche, very situational. If you're not doing that, this skill is useless. Okay, now we've got Luminous Shards. Now this is a good skill. You would take the Luminous Shards morph if you were going to use it. So it provides extra resources. So it gives resources. It's the same synergy as an Orb synergy. Orbs can be used by everybody, and Shards can only be used by one person. However, Luminous Shards, this morph in particular, is it's possible to, when somebody activates it, they get more resources. So if you're running a dungeon build and you want to provide your group with some resources, maybe you want to be a real nice tank, you can use Luminous Shards. Luminous Shards is also good for gear sets such as Olorim. If you're running a dungeon build with Olorim, if you're doing a trial like VHOF where you're at range but you want to provide Olorim, you can throw a shard onto your group. When that shard lands on the group, it procs Olorim. So then you can do that from range. You can provide Olorim from range. You can throw Olorim wherever you want it to go by using shards. So it's like a very good skill if you do use a set like Olorim where you've got to place an AoE on the ground to proc a gear set. It's excellent for that situation. So that was one of the things I did personally in VHOF, again, on the first boss, I was provided Olarim to the group in the stack on the entrance, and I was stood in the middle. So I was throwing a shard onto the group, they were getting Olarim. So really, really nice for that situation. The next skill is Radiant Ward, and this is one of the great survival tools of a Templar. It's a magicka costing shield, so it's not super high cost. I don't think it's quite as high costing as Igneous Shield. It's a little bit cheaper, but it doesn't have as much utility as Igneous Shield either. Now, the reason I use this particular skill, I basically use this skill instead of a self-heal, because the self-healing abilities that are available for a Templar Tank are very, very restricted. They don't have a burst heal, so I kind of combine small heals over time along with this particular damage shield. So when you cast this, in my current state, I'm not wearing any gear and I'm still getting a 10k damage shield. This will easily go up to 15 to 20k if you're fully buffed up with gear and everything on. Right now, as you see, 30k health and I'm not wearing any gear. If I was wearing gear, this would easily be a much, much bigger shield. So the fact is, it's a magicka costing damage shield that's going to be really big. It scales from that max health, so it's really, really useful. Then we get on to the passives. So the useful passives for a Templar, you do not need Piercing Spear. Save the points. It's going to increase your damage. If you are doing solo content, then obviously take it because you will need that damage. If you're doing situations where you hybridize tanking, then obviously take it because you need it. If you're only going to be tanking, then you do not need it. Spear Wall grants minor protection for 6 seconds, reducing damage taken by 5%. When you activate an Aedric Spell ability. So when you cast Radiant Ward, you're also going to get damage reduction from minor protection. So it's kind of a dual functioning skill. It'll proc Spear Wall as well as giving you that shield. So it's kind of nice. Burning Light, again, you don't need to take this. This is a damage-based skill, so you can save your skill points if you're just going to be tanking. Take it if you're going to be doing some damage dealing or hybridizing or overland content. Balanced Warrior increases your weapon damage by 6% and your spell resistance. So obviously you absolutely want to take this. It's giving you a lot more resistances. The weapon damage can also be nice as well if you use a skill like Vigor, because weapon damage will buff your stamina-based healing skills. Okay, Dawn's Wrath. This is the most important one for tanking in a way, because this is where you get your group buff. The only group buff that a Templar provides is within this particular skill line. So, Nova, first of all, this is something you don't really need, especially for next patch, the Waking Flame patch. You won't need this. It provides Major Maim. Next patch, you're going to be able to get Major Maim from doing Frost Clench. So, this ultimate is completely derelict next patch because we can obtain Major Protection in much easier, cheaper, more consistent ways. So, you would never use Nova from next patch. And that's all I've already got to say about that. Sunfire. So you could use this. This is a skill you could use to help with Elemental Catalyst if you are tanking and using that gear set, or you maybe want a more reliable uptime of Encratis. Instead of using a Flame Glyph, you could use this skill. The problem's going to be finding the bar space to slot it. So it deals flame damage and flame damage over time. So it's a good way to get Elemental Catalyst. It's a decent way to maintain your Encratis 100%. If you're not doing that though, it's not really worth using. It's also difficult to find the bar space, so it's really up to you. You can just use a Flame Glyph to achieve that, but if you are using Elemental Catalyst, you would probably need to use a skill like this, or a different flame skill. Solar Flare, this is not a skill that you need at all for a tank, so we'll just skip straight past it. Power of the Light. This used to be a very, very important skill for the Templar. Now it's extremely situational. So, if you are range tanking, so as an example of range tanking, the Locustes fight in Sunspire. You stand at the back of the room and you have the range tank. When you do that, it means that you're not able to apply major and minor breach with a range taunt. So you could use Power of the Light to activate that on that enemy, and also with the major breach. So this can be good for those situations. And things like Asylum Sanctorium, you can put it on the spheres, so you can be stacking the mini bosses onto St. Olms, and you can range the spheres around the edge, the protectors, with Power of the Light. So it's a very situational use. There's certain trial situations for sure where this is useful. I can think of 1 or 2 dungeon situations where it might be useful as well. So this is an option, but it's not 100% necessary anymore. The next skill is Living Dark. The Morph of Eclipse. This is a fantastic skill now. So it lasts for 6 seconds. it protects you for 6 seconds. This works better in ad pulls than anywhere else. So anytime an enemy uses a direct damage attack against you, the sphere lashes back, reducing the movement speed by 60% for 3 seconds, healing you for 1,921 health. These effects can occur every half a second, and it scales off your spell damage or max health, whichever is higher. So when we've got our 40 plus K health, when we're set up as a tank, this is going to heal for about 3k every half a second. So you activate it, an enemy hits you with a direct damage attack, and then you get healed for about 3k health every half a second. So it's huge. The main issue with this skill is it's not a burst heal. Obviously 3k every half a second is nice, that's 6k a second. It costs 4.1k magicka, so it's not something you can keep running all the time. But this is the skill that you're mostly going to use nowadays to proc your group buff. So the group buff that you get is in the passives. This is the most useful skill nowadays to use for proccing it, unless you absolutely need Power of the Light. So yeah, this is a good skill. When you combine Living Dark alongside other Templar heals over time, you can reach about 8 to 10k heals per second. So it can be useful. It does function well, but it does mean you have to slot like 3 different healing skills to benefit from having that kind of big burst of healing. There's no skills for the Templar that give you that big burst of healing. You have to rely on multiple sources of healing over time. And like I say, this is best used in ad pulls. So if you run into a big ad pull, 6 to 8 ads, you activate this. They're going to be hitting you regular. You're going to be getting hit very, very quickly by a lot of different things. So you're going to get a lot of healing via this particular skill. Then we've finally on the skills for this one, we've got Radiant Destruction. It's an execute skill, not really useful for tanking. As you can see there, the damage there is not that great. If you really, really, really wanted to incorporate some damage, then obviously you could use it, because it will increase. Deals up to 480% more damage to enemies below 50%. So if you had an abundance of magicka, you had all your debuffs and your buffs active, you had nothing to do, you want to help because your damage in the group is really, really low, you really could kind of slot this if you absolutely wanted to. The damage isn't going to be anything to be excited about, but it's just an option if the situation is there. The next skill, the passives now, we've got Enduring Rays. Increases the duration of your Sunfire, Eclipse, Solar Flare, and Nova abilities by 2 seconds. This is vital. So we want this because it's going to increase our Living Dark by an extra 2 seconds. So the duration of this is 4 seconds. It goes up to 6 there, as you can see. So it's very important to make sure that we have that passive. The next passive provides us with Ultimate. So we get 3 Ultimate when we're in combat. We use a Dawnwrath skill, and it can occur once every 6 seconds. So basically, if you casted Living Dark on cooldown, you're going to get 3 Ultimate. So if you are kind of the off tank, maybe you've got a bit more resources, a bit more time, you could just pretty much spam that skill to generate additional Ultimate. But it's nice to have that, because even though if you're not doing that, you're still getting an extra bit of Ultimate gain every 6 seconds. The Illuminate passive, this is our group buff on the Templar Tank, so minus sorcery. This is around about a 2 to 3k DPS increase for your group. So this is a magicka group only though. If you're in a stamina group, the Templar Tank is more or less useless because you don't have any group buffs. This is pretty much your only group buff. And the reason why, obviously, the Templar Tank is not super necessary is there's usually a Templar healer or a Templar damage dealer in most groups. So it's not really difficult to obtain this. This lasts for 20 seconds, gives it 10% spell damage. Definitely worth having. You've got to have it. In any magicka group, you want to have this. So this is why like a Templar would be used in a group, in a trial. So when you've got no other Templar, you take a Templar tank, usually the off tank, and they're used for this passive because everybody gains about 3k DPS, which is really, really nice. Final passive reduces the health, magicka, stamina, and ultimate cost of your abilities by 5%. So every single thing you do is reduced in cost. So this is absolutely vital because sustain is quite difficult for a Templar. Okay, the final one, we've got Restoring Light. This is not a skill that you need. I've taken it just because when I'm running random dungeons, sometimes the healer dies, somebody dies. So I'm trying to give a little bit of healing to my group. So I slotted it for that. But generally you just probably slot like a barrier front bar. But I've slotted this just as a bit of utility for like those random vet dungeons and things like that. Rush Ceremony. So this is like one of the best heals you can do on a Templar, and as you can see, it's not a very good one. 4,379 health. This is a heal that scales with spell damage and max magicka. As a tank, we don't have very much of either of those things. And so this heal is really, really poor on a tank. And one of the big things as well is the fact that when you cast it, it might not hit you. So you can't rely on this for a self-heal. This has always been the problem with the Templar, is the lack of self-heals. This is one of the reasons, because this could hit somebody in front of you instead of healing yourself. So you do have to be careful, and it's not really worth the magicka cost. It's expensive, 4,360 magicka to do a 4k heal, and it might not even hit you. So it's not great. It's not ideal. Okay, now we've got Healing Ritual. This is now increased even more. So again, this scales with spell damage and max magicka. It costs 5k magicka, and it will heal everybody for 3,284 within range. So it's got a 10 meter range, and it's going to heal everyone. So if you wanted to guarantee yourself a heal, and it's a magicka costing heal, this would be it. And unfortunately, if you think about it, that's going to heal you for 3,284. Living Dark is going to do about the same per second. So it's not really worth it. It's such an expensive skill. You're going to be out of magicka very fast. It's not even a burst heal. 3,000 health when you've got 40k health is absolutely nothing. So it's not worth using. The next skill is Repentance. You can use either morph. So Radiant Aura is the other morph, and that provides AoE minor magicka steal. So that is the preferred morph for group content. So in group content, you want to use the other morph. For solo content, or for things like dungeon content, Repentance is a really, really good skill. So what happens here is it restores health and stamina. It restores health to your group members as well. So like if you're using this in a dungeon and you kill some enemies, it like leaves corpses on the ground. You use this to consume the corpses, and it gives you stamina, and it heals you and your allies. It's worth having this skill just slotted on your bar for the minor fortitude, minor endurance, minor intellect, because you're going to get extra magicka recovery, health recovery, stamina recovery. The magicka recovery is really nice. The 15% more magicka recovery is really, really nice. So just having this slotted is worth it. If you're in dungeons and you're using Silver Leash to chain enemies in, this is extremely vital, because you don't have any other method of chaining enemies in other than using this. Like, if you combine this with Silver Leash, it's less of a problem. But spamming Silver Leash to chain enemies is very, very difficult. So this is kind of vital for dungeon content to make sure you can sustain your chaining. Next, we've got Extended Ritual. Now, this is a nice skill. This is like a group utility skill. This is another kind of... It's a group utility skill, but it's not super essential. But it's really nice to have in certain circumstances. So it's a heal over time. It heals every 2 seconds. You can get this to heal for over 1,000 every 2 seconds as a tank quite easily. The fact that it lasts for 24 seconds is the biggest benefit. So you place it down, it's going to constantly be ticking, healing over time. It's really, really nice. It also gives a Purify Synergy. This is one of the main functions for it. So it cleanses all harmful effects from for people, and it heals them. So if you're in a trial or a dungeon where you need a purge or a cleanse, you can just place this down. People use the synergy when they get the harmful effects applied to them, and then it's going to cleanse it and heal them. So it's a really, really nice utility skill for group content. So yeah, that's another good one. This is a self-purge as well, by the way. So when you cast it, it can cleanse 5 harmful effects from you. So you don't need to use purge if you're using this. You just place it down. It should cleanse you, and it'll help your group cleanse as well. The next skill, this got updated with Blackwood. This is a fantastic skill. The cost of it reduced down to 872 stamina. It actually does go a bit lower depending on what passives and things you've got going on, and also what race you are. Creates a rune of celestial protection, and you gain major resolve. So it gives you your resistance buff. You don't have to stand inside the rune to get that. You also recover 242 stamina every 1 second over the duration. Same applies to that. You don't have to be stood inside the rune to get the stamina or the resistances. So you just get those. When you cast this skill, you get stamina back every second. You get resistances. So it's a nice skill for that. The next benefit is by standing inside the rune, you heal every second for 1,577. This is actually a much bigger heal than that because it scales off your max health. So when you in your fully set up tank situation, you're on your 40 plus K health. This is going to heal you for around 2.5, 3K per second Combine that with Extended Ritual, combine that with Living Dark, you're looking at a good amount of healing over time. So it's really, really good. This is a fantastic skill, must-have skill. Vital for tanking on a Templar. Passives, increases the healing effects from your restoring light abilities by up to 12%. So this is actually quite good because your healing is going to like improve. So let's say you end up on really, really low health. Well, your healing effect, like the healing that you're getting from your skills is going to increase. So it's really important to get Mending. Sacred Ground while standing in your own Cleansing Ritual, Rune Focus. You gain minor Mending. So more healing buffs. So 2 healing buffs there. Also increases the amount of damage you can block by 10%. So by standing in your room, by standing inside your Restoring Focus, you're going to get increased block mitigation. 10% more block mitigation by standing inside the Sacred, because the Sacred Ground passive is going to proc in that situation. Then we've got Light Weaver. When you heal an ally under 50% health with a Restoring Light ability, you grant them 2 ultimates. So this is giving you group ultimate. So you only need to place Extended Ritual down, and people in your group are going to get the Light Weaver. It's going to proc that, and it's going to give them that. So it's really good. It's giving group ultimate. So that's not something... that's something you absolutely want to have. And in Master Ritualist, you don't need this at all. So increases the res speed, resurrects allies with 100% more health. So if you want to take it, then you can, but it's not necessary. It can be useful if you do a lot of random content or you run dungeons. As a tank, you might have to res people. For trials, you should never be resing anybody as a tank. So typically, this wouldn't be useful for that. But yeah, this is an optional passive if you want to get it. So one of the main problems for Templar tanks is the fact that they really, really suffer with a lack of crowd control. So the reason why they're bad in 4-man content, they don't have like a Magicka or a class-based chain, so they have to rely on Silver Leash, which is super, super expensive and costs stamina. They also then have no crowd control abilities, not a single one. Not a single one that is like AoE, no immobilizations. So what happens is they have to use Turn Evil or Time Stop, both of which are very expensive. So Turn Evil is a very expensive stamina skill, and Time Stop is a very, very expensive Magicka skill. And they're also not very reliable. So like Time Stop, for example, takes time. You have to wait for it to stun the enemies, and it's not useful. And the only way to really worry about it is to kind of... You also can't CC an enemy that has been chained. So if you're using Silver Leash and then you're putting down Turn Evil, they can't be feared. Turn Evil is a fear, so those enemies cannot be feared after they've been chained. Enemies that have been chained can be immobilized, but the Templar doesn't have an immobilization. So it's a real problem. These things are a real problem for the Templar tank. In terms of trial use, they're only really useful if you're trying to optimize a group and you don't have any other Templar. That's the only time it's worth having a Templar tank. Other than that, I mean, the Templar gameplay isn't exactly really, really fun either, but some people like it, and that's absolutely fine. I do kind of enjoy playing it occasionally because it's very different to everything else because of the lack of burst healing. You have to rely on different sources of healing. You have to kind of make sure you're using shields and all that kind of stuff. So I do kind of like the Templar gameplay, but it's a bit restricted on what it offers the group. It's in a similar situation where the Nightblade is, where it only offers like one group benefit. And the biggest thing that it suffers from is the lack that it has to offer. Like a Dragon Knight tank has got chains, talons, igneous shield. They've got engulfing flames, stagger. There's so many things there that make them so good for group content. And then we're not even going to look at the passives. They've got passives that give them resources back. When you look at the Templar, the only things you've got to benefit a group are the minor sorcery and extended ritual. That is literally it, and potentially power of the light. So it really gives them very little function and use, unfortunately. So we can only hope that in the future they are going to update the Templar, give them something that makes them have that little bit extra for a group, maybe give them a bit more utility and make them that little bit more useful. What I would like to see personally is some kind of crowd control skill that is an immobilization, and I would like to see just generally a Magicka based chain. So like maybe they need to adjust a Sigic Order skill or a Mage's Guild skill that is underused and underutilized or not very good, and just make one of those into a Magicka based chain so every class can benefit from that as well. That'd be really, really nice. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens in the future, guys. So thanks very much for watching. This was an overview of the Templar tank.